Hello, this is Dr. Clark. This is Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology for Veterinary Technology. If you've gotten to this part, this means that you've actually successfully made it through the orientation modules to actually see this. And this is the correlated lecture that's going to go along with your basic Chapter 1. There's always the learning objectives at the beginning of all these PowerPoints. And these are going to be the same things that are going to be found in your book, so we're usually going to skip right over them. So, starting off with basically anatomy and physiology, it's very important to understand the difference between anatomy and physiology, and that's what this first slide goes over. So anatomy is always going to be the parts of the body, the forms, and the structure. So they're going to be things like your fingers, your hands, your nose, your ears. That's all a part of anatomy. Physiology is the actions of the body. So what actually are the functions? So like your hands, your fingers and your hand is the anatomy. The physiology is going to be actually making a fist. So the actual movement is going to be physiology, whereas anatomy is the structure. For your ears, it would be hearing. Hearing is going to be the physiology involved, or equilibrium and balance also comes from your ears. So that's the physiology. So the structure is the ears, the hearing, and the equilibrium is actually the function of the physiology, what it actually does, how it actually works. When we start looking at anatomy, there is what we call microscopic versus macroscopic. So macroscopic is anything that you can physically see with your eyes, and that's what's important to know, is that macroscopic you're going to see with your eyes. Microscopic, on the other hand, we're going to have to look through a microscope. So microscopic and microscope. Also, when we start looking at anatomy, we have regional anatomy, which is a specific area of the body. So all the anatomy on my arm right here, that would be regional. So looking at my fingers, my arm, my skin, and all that, that's a region. Systemic is going to be like the circulatory system. So that's going to be heart and all the blood vessels that go throughout the body. So that's the difference between regional and systemic. Real briefly, some planes of reference here, and there's a good photograph up on the screen. It's in your book too. We have several different reference planes that we look at across the body, and so the very first reference plane that we're going to talk about is the median plane. This is also known as the mid-sagittal, and this is actually what splits your right from your left. It runs right down the center of the body. So that's the median plane or the mid-sagittal plane. Off to the side, if we want to go a little bit to the right, we can have a right sagittal plane, which instead of going through the midline, we'll go through the right half of the body and split it in the right half into two. Or we could have a left sagittal plane, and that would split the body into on just the left half of the body. So there's a difference between sagittal and mid-sagittal there. We also have what we know as a transverse plane. Transverse plane is actually going to sit there and is actually going to cut the body in to front and back, what we also know as cranial and caudal. But it's going to cut the tail from the head right in the center of the body. Pretty much is going to divide the area that we'll get to talking about the abdomen and the thorax. Is pretty much where that transverse plane sits. There's also a dorsal plane, and dorsal plane is actually going to sit there, and it's actually going to take the back from the front. So it's going to actually run down the body this way right here, and it's going to take your back half, which is known as the dorsal half, from the ventral half, which is kind of your belly, your front side, your face. And so that dorsal plane is actually what separates your back from your belly. And so we talk on these planes when we're looking at specific areas of the body. Sometimes we'll have some of these planes that will actually be involved with limbs, and so you can actually have a transverse plane that's actually going to divide the limb from the lower half of the limb. So usually like on the forelimb on a person right here, the transverse plane is going to be right through your elbow, and so this is going to be what we call the distal end of the limb. This is going to be the proximal end of the limb. Distal meaning away, proximal meaning towards. So sometimes we will use some of these planes on limbs to describe specific areas. We have a whole bunch of directional terms that's very important to know. There's a whole list of them here. We're going to go through them really quick. It's very important for you to know your right hand from your left. And it's important to know that when you are looking at an animal, if you're facing forward of them, we talk about the animal side of the body. So if you're facing the animal, your right is not their right. Their right is going to actually be on your left. If you're facing the same direction the animal, so your face and their face is facing the same way, your right is going to end up being their right. So when we talk about the animal, we're talking about their right and left, not your right and left. So knowing your right from your left is very important. Cranial means towards the head, and caudal means towards the tail or towards the back feet. So that's cranial and caudal. When we're talking specifically about the head, we'll throw in an extra term, and that's rostral. That means towards the nose. So when we talk about the head itself, if you're already cranial, it's hard to be any more cranial. So we'll talk about rostral towards the end of the nose, and then once again caudal. And we'll use these terms to actually describe what direction that something's going to be in on the head. If we're looking at the back is always going to be dorsal. Just think of a dolphin with a dorsal fin. At the same time, ventral is going to be the belly or the bottom side. If we're looking at towards the middle of the body or that median plane, we call that medial. And if we're going away from the body, that's what we call lateral. So medial is going to be towards the median plane, and then lateral is going to be away from it. So a lot of times we'll use this to describe, say, on a forelimb. This would be the medial side. This right here would be the lateral side. If I'm looking at my body right here, this is medial, over here is lateral. If we're also looking a lot of times to figure out if something is deep or superficial, so deep is towards the inside of the body, so your heart is deep, it's in the middle. Superficial means on the surface or the outside, so like your skin is superficial. If we're looking at something that's going to be towards the body, it's called proximal. We especially use this on limbs to describe. Proximal is towards the body. Distal is going to be distant or away. So distal means distant and away. Proximal means in proximity, means close. So, my wrist is distal to my elbow. It's further away. Whereas my shoulder is proximal to my elbow. So if I actually look at my shoulder here, it's closer to my body than my elbow is. We also use terms called palmar and plantar when we actually look at the limbs and look specifically at the area that would be the paws or the hands. So the area where you're going to have the fingers at or the toes. So palmar is going to be the palm side. We actually call the top side of that dorsal. So there's palmar and there's dorsal when we actually look at the actual area of the paws on the animals or hands on people. On the feet, the part that you plant on the ground is what we call plantar on your feet. So on the hind limbs of animals, the part that's going to be in touch with the ground on their paws is going to be, or their hooves is going to be plantar, and once again the top is going to be called dorsal. We do have this thing called bilateral symmetry across the body. And so we kind of have a human example here. It shows where there's lateral. It shows some of the mid-sagittal, the median planes. In human, they use words anterior and posterior, superior and inferior. Superior means the same thing as cranial. Inferior means the same thing as caudal. Posterior means the same thing as dorsal. Anterior is going to mean the same thing as ventral. And so we'll actually see this sometimes accidentally used in veterinary medicine, but we prefer the terms cranial and caudal and dorsal and ventral. They're actually more correct than what the human terms superior and inferior are. But most animals, well, all animals and all people actually have equal symmetry on each side of the body. So there's equal halves. So it's very important to know that you should have one arm here on your right side and one arm on your left side. While there's only one nose on your face, it is symmetrical. You have two nostrils. You have two eyes. Even you can split your mouth. You only have one mouth, but There's equal sides between right and left, and it's very important to look at that symmetry. A lot of times this is how we know if there's something right or wrong with the animal. Some general plan of the overall body is one thing to know about is body cavities. So when we look at body cavities, there's two of these cavities, and the first one is what we call the dorsal body cavity, and that's because it's towards the back. And the dorsal cavity is going to hold the brain and spinal cord. So it's pretty much in the skull and runs down the spinal cord, and that's all it does in the dorsal cavity is it holds the brain and spinal cord. The ventral cavity is going to be below it, right next to the belly and the chest. And so you have one whole ventral cavity, and we actually split the ventral cavity into two parts. We have the thorax, which is going to contain the lungs and the heart, and then we're going to have the abdomen, which is going to contain the digestive organs, reproductive organs, and the urinary tract. And so this is actually going to be divided further by a muscle called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is what actually is going to divide the thorax, your lungs, and your heart from your abdominal viscera, which is your intestines, reproductive, and urinary organs. And so the dorsal cavity is just one big cavity that's going to hold the brain and spinal cord, and the ventral cavity is actually one large cavity that's split into two separate cavities, which are going to be the thorax and the abdomen. Basic levels of organizations. It's important to know that cells are the basic functional unit of animal life. So cell is the smallest thing within the body that can actually function and be alive. If we take a whole bunch of cells and we put them together and these cells are actually doing the exact same thing, that's what we actually call tissues. So like your skin, the top surface of your skin, the epithelium there is a tissue, and its main purpose is going to be to protect your body. And so what makes it a tissue is it's all the same type of cells, and they're all working together to make the same function. If we take a whole bunch of tissue and we actually put it together, and it functions as a unit together, then you have a whole organ group. So an organ would be something along the lines of like your small intestine. So its idea of it is to do a digestion and absorption of food products. And so that's one specific organ. It's one specific group of tissue that's going to sit there and work together for a common goal or a common interest in the body. An organ system would be like your whole digestive system. And so, you know, while your small intestine is a part of it, there's multiple organs that end up working together to accomplish the same goal. And so there's going to be things like your mouth and your tongue, your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, that are all going to be part of the digestive system, and they all work together. And there can be associated organs too, like the gallbladder, the liver, the pancreas. And so when we start looking at this level of organization, we always start off as cell. That's the small basic unit of functional life within the body. We put a whole bunch of cells together that are going to work and do the same thing. That makes a tissue. A whole bunch of tissues that work together in one specific area, you have an organ. And then you have a whole bunch of organs working together, and then you get an organ system. And when you put a whole bunch of organ systems together, then you get an organism. We are all organisms, and so therefore we're all made up of multiple organ systems that work and function together to keep us alive. Basically, one of the main things is health, and there's not actually a slide in here that kind of jumps to homeostasis, but health is a simple way of actually trying to keep normal anatomy and physiology of the body. And one way that the body actually does this is through homeostasis. And so homeostasis is this constant equilibrium that the body's doing. It's constantly trying to keep everything in balance. It's like a yin and a yang, if anybody knows the Chinese side of medicine and stuff. So for every action in the body, there should be an equal and opposite reaction. And it's trying to keep everything in balance like a scale. You're trying to keep everything on the level, and that's homeostasis. Do things in the body sometimes get a little bit out of level? Yes. And then the body tries to correct it and bring it right back into level. And so if we can maintain homeostasis, then we stay happy and healthy. If homeostasis stops, then that's when we have illness, and sometimes illness can potentially lead to death. So uh, that's pretty much the end of the PowerPoints here. The most important thing for you to do is to go ahead and do your pre-assessment quiz and then start working on your problem-based learning case. And I will see you in lab on Thursday.